Now, the introduction to Superman, this character was so popular. There's an old saying when it comes, might have to do with the movie business, any kind of creative business, might have to do with music, whatever. It's also true in comics, is that nobody wants to be first, but everybody wants to be second. So when there's some new big thing, people are really reluctant to try something new, but when some new thing really gets going and people get excited about it, everybody wants to jump on board and do what they can. So with the advent of Superman, there came a whole bunch of superheroes. Because Superman he was the first comic book superhero. Now, we could make some arguments that there were superheroes who predate Superman, like Zorro and the Scarlet Pimpernel. They debuted in novels, they have secret identities and all that. There's also a character called the Phantom, who is a comic strip character. He is not quite as well known outside of, comics fandom. So we're going to go with Superman as the world's first comic book superhero. Shortly after Superman, though, is probably one of the next most well-known, maybe even better known, and that is, of course, Batman. Batman was created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. A little bit more on his creation in just a bit here. You probably already know this, but millionaire Bruce Wayne dresses like a creature of the night and battles the forces of evil. Later on, stories revealed that Batman declared his war on crime due to the fact that he witnessed his parents being shot down in front of him when he was just a small child. In the very first story with him, you don't really learn a whole lot about him. Again, it's not until the character is popular and people start to demand more stories that they start to fill in his backstory, to start to add a bit of stuff there. What I really want you to take note of here is, as I'm kind of jumping through the decades, that Batman, those original stories, you can see the artwork, it's kind of dark, it's kind of grim. As we start getting in the late 40s and the 1950s, he's a little bit more cartoony. The colors are quite a bit brighter. You may or may not be familiar with the 1960s TV show, which was very campy. It's almost played more for laughs. It's a bit silly. Shortly after that show, because it was a really big hit for a couple of years, but then when it went away, there was actually some times where it looked like Batman comics might go away. And then the creators and the editors and the publishers, they decided they needed to do something with the character. So they decided to start bringing him a little bit more back to his roots. And as you can see, especially I think right here, you got a pretty good evolution, seeing him from a sort of cartoony look to a little bit of more of a grim look. I know you kind of see his villain, Man-Bat, a little better than you see Batman there. But you kind of see where that's going. That's the artist Neil Adams, who in many ways redefined the way Batman looked. And again, you can see that the stories, we get more, the darker colors again, emphasis on a little bit, the action, the violence is a little bit not quite as cartoony. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily give it to a really little kid. And basically, if you're familiar with Batman now from the various movies, the way he's been for the last, 25 years or so, this is the Batman that you're probably more familiar with. In 1940, they introduced his kid sidekick, Robin. And basically, the thinking behind introducing Robin was to give kids, because it was the audience for these superhero comics were little boys. I mean, nowadays, comic books, you get a wide range of people. I'm 46, I read comic books. Back in the 40s and 50s, a 46-year-old who read comics would probably keep it a secret. Nowadays, if you're 46 and you read comics, you're loud and proud about it. You're not hiding that. It's a bit different back then. It was mostly little kids, and it was intended mostly for little kids. So Robin was a character that was introduced in there to give the kids somebody to relate to. Because Batman, he's your uncle, he's your dad, he's an authority figure. But, Robin, hey, that could be you, and you can imagine yourself. Now, whether little kids actually responded that way or not is another thing, but That's what happened, and a lot of superheroes afterwards then followed suit, and they would have their kid/teen sidekicks. Now, depending on how big a screen you can see there, you may or may not be able to read that comic strip. You could probably Google it if you're just looking at it on your phone. It's what if Bob Kane had gone ahead and created Batman without Bill Finger? Now, I told you guys about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who for the longest time didn't get the credit, didn't get the money that was probably, that they deserved for creating such a beloved character. Bob Kane signed a very different kind of a contract, though. Bob Kane, he always got a percentage of what was being made off of Batman. Unfortunately, Bill Finger didn't. Bill Finger was considered, as far as his contract goes, as kind of like an employee under Bob Kane. And for the longest time, and up until recently, the very first major thing was the Batman v Superman movie. However you might feel about it, the one thing that was good about it, it was the very first movie where in the end credits, it said Batman created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Everything before that, it'd be Batman created by Bob Kane. Nowhere was there Bill Finger. There's an excellent documentary called Batman and Bill that talks about Bill Finger and his contributions and how basically he died in poverty. And the only person to be able to enjoy him finally getting credit is his granddaughter. So it's kind of a sad thing. But here's the thing. When you think of Batman, because I know a lot of you guys, maybe you've never read a comic book in your life, but you know a thing or two about Batman. Bill Finger's contributions are all the things that you think of when you think of Batman. And if you see in that comic strip, you see a Bat-Man with a character who's wearing a red suit. And yeah, he's got bat-like wings. He doesn't have a colorful assortment of villains. He's just got that domino mask on. He doesn't even look like a bat. That was Bill Finger's idea. He doesn't have Commissioner Gordon. He doesn't have the colorful assortment of characters. He doesn't have the Batmobile. I believe he didn't have the Bat Cave. All those things that we think of when we think of Batman were contributed by Bill Finger, and he didn't really get the recognition that he deserved until long after his death. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Bob Kane isn't important. There would be no Batman without Bob Kane, but there also wouldn't be Batman as we know him. There may have been a Batman who would be one in 20 billion comic book superheroes that nobody knows about anymore. But there wouldn't be the Batman that we know and love had it not been for the contributions of both of these creators. Our next superhero was created by C.C. Beck and Bill Parker back in 1940, and his name was Captain Marvel. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Marvel movies and current superhero movies, you might be looking at that and saying, that's not Captain Marvel, that's Shazam. Well, when he first debuted, he was Captain Marvel. Now, it is a really long story as to why he later became known just as Shazam, and why Captain Marvel is Captain Marvel. There is no connection between these two characters. Again, it's a long story. I don't want to get into that for this. Maybe I'll make a separate video, or I'll link to a video where somebody else already did that for me. However, just forgive me if I go back and forth between Captain Marvel and Shazam. I'm not talking about the one that Brie Larson played in the movie, who's a fantastic superhero. Not putting that character down. It's just, this is the one I'm talking about, the original Captain Marvel. And this comic, and if you saw the movie, the neat thing about this is with the movie, as when I've been doing these notes for more than 15 years now, and most of my students had not heard of Shazam. Maybe it seemed vaguely familiar, and I would say they're talking about making a movie, and now that they have, he's a lot more recognizable. So a lot of you guys are probably already familiar with this basic story. So I'll probably run through it a little bit faster than I might have usually. But it started with a young boy named Billy Batson, who befriended a wizard by the name of Shazam. Whenever young Billy would say the wizard's name, he would transform into an adult superhero. And just like before, I'm showing you the various images of Shazam over the decades. Captain Marvel's powers, they included the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, and the speed of Mercury. Realize Shazam is an acronym spelling out Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, Mercury, all of them Greco-Roman, with the exception of Solomon. That's a biblical reference. Now, the reason that I like to keep him, why I have him on these notes, even before most of my students knew who he was, is because of all these various superheroes, Captain Marvel really captures something about superheroes that's important, especially early superheroes. By no means is this the only important thing, but he really exemplified what we call an adolescent power fantasy. What I mean by that is, again, realize the original audience for this sort of a thing. It was little boys who were reading this, and when you're a little kid, you are oftentimes pushed around by bullies, by your your parents, your older brothers and sisters. You don't have a whole lot of power. You're essentially just kind of going along. You don't get to make a whole lot of your own decisions. It's not so much you have a lot of responsibilities. You just don't have a whole heck of a lot of freedom. And this idea of a superhero who is actually just a little boy who says a magic word is very appealing to little kids. And this is the reason why Captain Marvel / Shazam was outselling Superman comics. Because Superman, for as popular and cool as he is an adult. And if you're a little boy and you're reading you're looking for comic books to read, and you've got this one character who's basically just like you, but he's able to become strong and powerful, that's very appealing.